listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe, welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Good morning, folks. Morning. It is October 8th, just past 7 a.m. Eastern. How are you doing this morning, Jamarl?
So far, so good.
Good to hear. Good to hear. All right, and let's get into headlines. First up in COVID stats. We've got yesterday in the United States, 104,942 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,765 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of just under 100,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 56% of the total American public, 56% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 65% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 44,156,000 people across the United States and has killed 710,342 people here in the U.S. In national political news, the shooting of teenager Mawala Mona Rodriguez has transitioned into a homicide investigation after she was taken off life support yesterday. Long Beach school safety officer Eddie Gonzalez had noticed Mona and a 15-year-old girl fighting on school property. When he intervened, Mona jumped into a car with other friends, and as the car sped off, Gonzalez opened fire, fatally wounding Rodriguez. In California, Gavin Newsom signed a bill into law making stealthing illegal. This is the practice of removing a condom during sexual intercourse will not be classified as a civil sexual battery offense. This is the first anti-stealthing law in the country and will result in, quote, general, special, and punitive damages, end quote. 18 former NBA players have been arrested and indicted in an alleged $4 million scheme to defraud the NBA health plan. The players colluded and submitted fake reimbursement claims for exams and procedures that were not performed. In holiday news, Philadelphia will officially recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday instead of Columbus Day, as the practices of sexual assaults, torture and genocide by Columbus and his men becomes more public knowledge. More and more cities around the country are celebrating an Indigenous replacement to the federal holiday. And in international news, China has ordered dozens of coal mines to up their coal production by nearly 100 million tons. This comes as Europe and now China are struggling to provide energy to their countries. Nearly 60% of China's energy comes from coal power. And back briefly to holiday news here, it is National Fluffernutter Day and National Pierogi Day. And with that, that's our first batch of headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
I didn't think you were going to add the nutter part.
Just the fluffer part.
Yeah. I was like, what? They have a day?
National Fluffer Day, and then Gavin Newsom's passing this anti-stealthing law. We live in an increasingly sexualized country, Jamarl.
Wow.
I can't take it.
I want to get to this murder of Mona Rodriguez. This is astonishing.
I want to get to some pierogies, man.
Oh, the pierogies.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, just to recount the story, she's in a fight with someone at school. All right, fair enough. Kids fight is what it is. A cop, and not even a cop. He's basically, what is he? He's a Long Beach school safety officer. Ironic, given what took place. But the safety officer, Eddie Gonzalez, saw the fight. Mona tries to escape. It's like, all right, I'm getting out of here. Now, mind you, if she comes back to school, you can always pick her up unless she's basically just going to go away forever from school. But she jumps into a car. And the safety officer believes he is somehow keeping the peace by pulling out a gun and firing at the car. Now, he had no idea who was in the car. It could have been other people in the car. Not only could she have gotten hit, he could have hit the other people in the car. He could have hit the driver who could have careened into somebody else. This is like maniac behavior. How did he think that this was a good idea?
I don't know. Sounds like the school safety officer had some bad ideas. I mean, but here's the thing, man.
It's astonishing.
Of course it is, but also, I don't know. Yeah, Yes, it is astonishing. But what lesson are we taking away from it? Is this just a brief glimmer of a story? Are we going to go into do we need to reform not just our policing, but our school safety officers? Because I'm on board with that, but I'm also on board with like reforming our entire educational system. So how deep do we really want to go? Or is this just some dude being an idiot? Before the internet, this would have been confined to a local community to banter about and mock him and shame him and fire him and replace him with somebody who did a better job. You know what I mean? But because of the internet.
I don't really see what this has to do with school or education. I do know that this transition that people have taken, or that some states and localities have taken, where they've started putting cops in schools. I mean, I was at the tail end of this. I think by the time I was in, let's say, middle school, going into high school, they would have like safety officers just kind of roaming the schools. Didn't have a gun, didn't have a weapon, certainly didn't have this thing in their heads where even if he did, that he would basically pull out that weapon and start firing bullets at a moving car to try to, kill? What's her name? I mean, what was he trying to accomplish here? I mean, was he actually trying to murder her because she was fleeing the scene?
I don't know. It sounds like he got over animated in some sense and tried to shoot people who are running away.
Yeah, that's astonishing.
If adrenaline is pumping through your blood, I can understand how you would make a mistake like that, but you shouldn't be in a uniform protecting the school.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't make mistakes like that. That's astonishing. He tried to murder a child and he apparently accomplished it. I mean, look, from the standpoint of the way cops behave and everything else, I would argue that it goes to there. It's this authority thing that gets in their head where it's like, I'm telling you to stop. And so anything that I do, even if I'm not being attacked, even if I'm not under threat, is perfectly acceptable in doing so. That's just a maniac behavior. And yeah, you're right. Nobody should be in uniform if they're going to do some nonsense like this. I would hope that even cops weren't stupid enough to do something like this. I've seen cops beat up children in school when let's say a kid is in a fight, cops gets involved and like beat the living devil out of like a 12-year-old. I've seen that. But seeing a cop literally pull out a gun and try to murder somebody who's basically fleeing the scene is astonishing. And so, yeah, I'm glad they've converted that to a murder. And I hope they put him under the jail. Man, I can't believe that. I mean, think of all the fights that take place in high school, middle school, etc. It's part and parcel to school. I mean, unless you're telling me this, she had brass knuckles or she had some kind of bat or she was trying to kill the other girl. And even then, in this situation, that's not what's taking place. She's basically trying to escape the scene. I don't know, man. That's painfully unfortunate.
Yes, it is. It's bad.
That's astonishing.
And it makes me want pierogies even more.
Yeah, right. It's like, I need a comfort.
You have pierogi? You ever have pierogies?
I have not.
Those are like delicious little, I forget if they're Ukrainian or Russian.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Central Eastern European nations, little dumplings basically.
Yeah.
With usually savory. Delicious.
Never had them.
Delicious. There's Marivana place I talked about right around the corner. This Russian place. We should go there sometime.
Yeah.
They have pierogies there.
Okay.
We should do it.
I think the only thing I had, there's a Russian restaurant in, I think, New York that a friend of mine took me to. And they had this Polish sausage that was astonishingly good. Like, it was so good.
Yeah. Those Polishes are delicious.
Yeah.
There's like this whole class of cuisine that you got pierogies. And then I just went to Seattle. You have pierogies.
And what are pierogies?
Pierogies are like, pierogies are more like dumplings with like a thin flour. Pierogies are more like phyllo dough. They're like a thicker pastry thing. And this can be sweet or savory, but like the dough is a different type.
It's the dough that makes a difference.
The dough, yeah, exactly. It's more like of a puff pastry kind of a thing that gets the idea across, like thinner, flakier, that kind of thing. Anyway, in Seattle, in Pike Place Market, there's a pierogi I grew up going to with my dad, which is just a little restaurant. Super popular, crazy popular. You go there and there's like a long line for this place. Anyway.
That's funny.
Just while we're on the subject of Russian dumplings and baked goods.
Speaking of Russian dumplings, we're going to have Dr. Kogan coming on today at 8:15 to talk about his new book. Something I didn't know. I was reading through his press, I guess, I don't know what you call it, press spot for his book. And inside it was like Mikhail Misha Kogan. Misha is what I've always said I would name my kid for maybe a decade now.
Oh, really?
Because Mikhail Tal, his nickname was always Misha. Mikhail Tal was one of my favorite players growing up. And so it's like, oh, Misha, he has a nickname, Misha. Very cool. I've always loved the name.
Or middle name, right?
Yeah, middle name. Well, see, I took that as his nickname. I didn't take it as his middle.
Well, no, did it come with like quotation marks?
I thought it had quotation marks.
Yeah. Interesting nickname.
Yeah. So maybe Mikhail is just Misha in general, kind of like Robert and Bob.
When I don't know if it's today or if it's his next appearance, but one of these days, Jamarl, when Dr. Kogan's on, we got to pull out the Misha. We got to be like, hey, Misha, how are you doing this morning? He's like, wait, what?
What the? Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. You put it on your book.
I know, right?
I'm just kidding.
It's fair game. Totally fair game.
No, but that should be interesting. Again, talking about like CBD, the benefits of cannabis. I'm actually interested in getting into the question with him of like, okay, sativa versus indica. There are terpenes. How do these affect you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that like medically
Yeah.
is the research that's out there, which last I checked was kind of scant. But research that's out there, what does it say about what type of weed you're smoking and what long-term or short-term medical effects it's going to have on you, you know, beneficially.
And he would be the perfect person. I mean, the name of the book is Medical Marijuana, Dr. Kogan's Evidence-Based Guide to Health Benefits of Cannabis and CBD.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes these guys have this stuff down to a science. It's like, hey, man, this has good terpenes in it, and it has these type of cannabinoids, and it would be good for blah, 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 blah. And so we've come a long way on the whole marijuana thing.
Also, one more headline to throw in here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
This is from international news. Dmitry Muratov, he's an editor and journalist, won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. Basically, he had this newspaper, has this newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, in Russia. It's like one of the more prominent sort of dissident, anti-Putin, you know, slightly more West-leaning newspapers out there. Anyway, owner of this newspaper got a Nobel Peace Prize. So, you know, his newspaper was often critical of Putin. The need to give a Nobel Peace Prize to somebody who doesn't like Russia feels a couple of years old at this point now that we moved to targeting China as our main geopolitical foe. But just interesting to know.
Looks like they would give that to Julian Assange if they had to give it to anybody.
You wish, oh God.
I mean, and the only reason I say that is if they're going to basically give this guy a journalist or something like that,
exactly.
then the one who earns it is Assange. Well, I mean, yeah, they could like what he's saying in this case, but in real terms, I mean, the man has basically suffered for his art, to put it mildly. There's apparently, Kamala Harris has been caught saying Biden and Harris administration is the most pro-labor union administration in American history. In American history. So she's basically invisible most of the time. And when she comes out, she basically says nonsense.
We're the greatest of all time.
Right. Of all times, FDR included.
Exactly.
So get out of here. If you want to say the greatest in 5 years, okay, fair enough, maybe. And even that may be somewhat questionable.
I was on a bike ride with my brother the other day. We were just riding around, and we saw the Teamsters building.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I forget, you know, they have different branches, but the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters, I think it was like one of their main branches down part of D.C. And he was like, do the Teamsters still exist? Are they still operational?
Like, is that still a thing?
Yeah, which is on the one hand an offhanded joke. On the other hand, a sign of how absolutely unions have declined and decayed in society.
It really is.
Where he's like, wait, do they even exist?
So that's still a thing?
When she says that, what exactly is she bragging about?
I mean, it's not like they passed the Pro-Business Act. I mean, you know, keep in mind, Biden had been promising a lot of stuff, including $15 an hour minimum wage, threw that up for grabs. The pro-business thing, which many of the unions and many of the supporters wanted him to pass, not even brought up as part of their agenda. I have no idea what she is talking about in this particular statement. And at this point, you know, politicians basically say whatever they want to say. It doesn't necessarily have to correlate to reality. And in their heads, they go like, well, we mean this very slim, narrow nanometer of a thing that we're talking about. Yeah, but you didn't specify and nail down that slim nanometer issue that you're talking about that you guys are most pro-labor on. I have zero idea what Kamala Harris is talking about.
I bet if there were a union of marijuana dealers, she would try to put them in prison.
Yeah, she would.
Right?
If providing they weren't already there based on what she's doing as a prosecutor in that office. Yeah,
exactly.
And then she would laugh about it on stage when somebody brings it up to her. She would never be president. She would never be president. Mark my words. If the Democratic Party is going to run her in, 2 more years or something to that effect, you will lose. You will lose. She is magnificently unlikable.
Yeah, she is pretty unlikable. It's a little bit hard for me to tell with some of these things. But that was my feeling with Hillary, is that she's so unlikable. People, such a broad spectrum of society, you know, just
dislikes her.
Feels like she's not trustworthy, that she's bloodthirsty, that she's cold and calculating, et cetera, all the different things. And then Kamala comes along, and it's like Hillary 2.0, but with a different skin color,
right?
a little bit younger, and she's not tied at the waist to somebody. You know, she's not tied to Bill Clinton, who of course was president,
right?
And you know, a decently popular one in his own way for a little while there.
I don't know. I think Kamala Harris is worse. The prosecutor thing is just gross. I mean, trying to put people in prison, trying to put a she's giving a story. Basically, this is her success story, talking about putting a homeless mom or threatening a homeless mom with prison because the kids had truancy violations. Now, think about that. Now, what is the issue here? Is the issue that the kids can't get to school in time, or is the issue that the mom is homeless? And it's like, I'm going to put you in prison if you don't do X, if you don't get those kids to go to school more often. It sounds like the woman is having a lot more issues other than the schooling thing. But the fact that she's relaying this and she giggles as if this is some feel-good story. I mean, the putting people in prison for pot, the keeping prison with the judge is basically have to compel her to let people out of prison because she refuses to let them out of prison because she wants to use the labor in order to fight fires. I mean, a despicable person. I mean, a character. I mean, the fact that Tulsi Gabbard was able to basically eat her alive in 30 or 45 seconds saying, this is your life. And the crowd is like, ugh, 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 ugh. Need a shower after hearing that. And she had no response because all of it was true.
Well,
that's the worst part.
But also, man, what's confusing is all get out to me is that last year, that was 2020.
Yeah.
That was a big presidential election in the United States last year.
Mm-hmm.
And also in 2020, we had COVID,
mm-hmm.
and we had these protests that were kind of riotous in some cases all across the United States where people were protesting against like police violence and against policing and
2019, 2020,
the abuse of policing in general.
Yeah.
Right? It was 2020. I mean, this goes back to Ferguson, but like the protests proper were last year. That all kicked in, like what would that, May? It's after George Floyd's killing, of course. Anyway, then Kamala comes on. Just think about her presence. My point is, her presence as the vice president in the White House right now, or as the potential candidate for next president next time. As far as candidates go, her message and her background is so offbeat with where the public tenor is at, being anti-policing. And yet she, as a former prosecutor, and as somebody who's been kind of extra harsh, and is a part of the legal system, and people who, we bring this up sometimes, people who complain about cops as if they are the whole problem or whatever, you bring up the larger economic issues or larger social issues, clearly, but also just like the judicial system. We've had callers call it and be like, talking to us about local legal stuff they're having to deal with. Not police. Police are not directly involved in any way, but just judges and the courts in general, and sure, prosecutors too. And they're nasty. Yeah. It's all part of this bestial system of, self-serving, entitled officials who are, completely detached from the public interest, that kind of thing. So Kamala representing that system, coming into an American public that's pretty opposed to it, is not a good pick.
No, it's not a good, well, it's offbeat. But again, she didn't get elected for that. I mean, she was the first affirmative action vice president. Yep. I mean, this has everything to do with finding a black woman for the role. I mean, going back and looking at, what is this, Clyburn. Clyburn's thing was he needs to choose a black woman for vice president. And part of this was this kind of behind the deal or behind the table arrangement of basically, I'll give you my support for South Carolina. That support is the thing that puts you over the edge. You owe me, buddy. And what you owe me is we need a black woman for vice president. Now, Stacey Abrams kept, acted as if it should be me. But Biden ends up choosing Kamala Harris. I mean, Kamala Harris ran in the presidential election. She has her Hillary affiliates, meaning the connections with Hillary Clinton. And so that was the person he chose. But off kilter? Yes. Greatly off kilter. And I think as evidence of that, she's been basically anonymous in this administration. I mean, it's not like you've had this powerful president where, the vice president is kind of diminutive in the light of the luminary of the presidency. That's not it at all. Joe Biden is barely getting from point A to point B. I mean, she has an opportunity in that role to be the Dick Cheney of that role. And I don't mean Dick Cheney in the specifics of what Dick Cheney is, more so in the dominance that Dick Cheney basically revitalized the office. She could have superseded Biden in her doing these things and being in front of the media and getting these things accomplished. She just wasn't there. She didn't care. And so for the issues that Biden was giving her, immigration, I think there was one or two other issues, she still has been anonymous on that stuff. And so what ends up happening is Biden takes the hit for her malfeasance of not basically doing her job. That's why I say I don't think she has any chance of getting in office in 2024.
No, if she'd used, you're talking about her being like a backseat Darth Vader, like Cheney, who's actually steering things. But the thing is they're both, compared to Bush was more active than Biden.
Yes.
And Cheney was far more active than Harris. They were both far more active than their counterparts. This administration has just taken a step back.
Yeah.
And I still see people who are like happy, I like you if you settled for Biden. I've seen people saying that kind of thing. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't believe that somebody, but I literally saw somebody within the last day. I'll like you if you settled for Biden, that kind of thing. Like an almost direct paraphrase. That's all where some people are still at, you know?
It's like, oh, he's not Trump. And that in and of itself is enough. It's like, yeah, dude, that's not enough.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You want to,
let's go into
a break.
Monologue.
We can come back in your monologue, Jamarl's soapbox segment, possibly a short back and forth at the end of it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. You heard us starting off just in the back and forth banter before the show really gets up and running. We're talking about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, making this point that Joe Biden has not been this kind of dominant, hands-on, Mr. Everywhere president. That's despite the fact that in crisis, you would imagine the president would need to be that way, especially for this notion of leadership and taking the country out into a dark time. If you think of what FDR had to deal with, and he came in, powerful president, we have nothing but to fear but fear itself. It's been 60, 70 years. And that statement or that line, even if people don't necessarily know who said it, it's so iconic that it's basically traveled through the years to this current day, what it is still known. There's a certain dominance associated with that. And then you look at Biden and you think of all the issues that are availing this country, be it climate change, be it COVID, 700,000 people basically dropped dead. The job market, meaning all of these economic issues and weirdness associated with people losing their jobs from COVID or this kind of reorganization of our economic system. He seems out of the loop on this entirely, despite the fact that this is the moment where you would expect the president to gain sway. The fact is, though, the public has started to notice. And because the public has started to notice, Biden has started to take a hit in his polling. A Gallup poll last week found Biden approval rating among independents fell to 37%, the lowest it's been since he's taken office. Mind you, he's only been in office for less than a year, slipping 24 points below his 61% approval rating at the beginning of his administration. But that, again, Biden started his administration at 61% approval rating, and the number has dropped to 37% based on a Gallup poll, slipping 24%. An Associated Press poll last Friday found Biden's approval rating among independents had dropped 62% in July to 38% in September. That poll puts Biden overall approval rating at 50%, down from 54% in August. But the drop among independents is precipitous in both of these polls. And last week, this is what, today? Yesterday, you have another poll. This one is Quinnipiac. The poll found 38% of those surveyed approve of Biden's job performance, just 38%, while 53% disapprove, greatly underwater. Biden's numbers dropped from a Quinnipiac poll released last month that found 42% had approved of his performance, with 50% disapproving. Now, this dip, again, is largely because of independents, 60% of whom said they disapproved of Biden's job performance. In September, 52% of independents gave him poor marks. This is decidedly going down. The one thing that Biden got strong rating in has to do with his approach to COVID, with 48% of voters approving of Biden's handling of the pandemic. But if you think of that, 48% is still kind of low, especially since Biden was supposed to be the one who rights the ship on COVID. He's the guy who had the vaccines from day one. And you would think that whatever particular policy that he was going to go along with, that was going to be the thing that tries to settle this issue. And oftentimes we've had all sorts of confusion from the administration and from the CDC officials, not to mention that just monkeying around with the evidence or with the information associated with the number of breakthrough infections and those type of things, where they stopped even taking the notes because they were trying to get the public to behave in a particular way regarding the vaccinations. Less than 40% of voters gave Biden positive marks on his handling of the economy, his job as commander-in-chief, and his work on foreign policy and immigration. That is not good. That's not good at all. Democrats don't want to own this, and many of them won't necessarily accept or even, deal with the reality of this. But this is earned. This is not a situation where it's like, oh, they're just being unfair to Joe Biden. No, they're not just being unfair to Joe Biden. Donald Trump was the previous president. Biden comes in. You would think that just because of the comparison between the two, that Biden would get this kind of bump, which he probably did. But the catch becomes that bump only lasts so long. At the end of the day, it's going to be what you do in that office, the perspective you give to people while you're in that office, and your capabilities as president. Biden controls the House and the Senate. Full stop. What has he accomplished? Despite controlling the House and the Senate, he dropped the $15 an hour minimum wage, didn't even fight for it. He called those people heroes. They're heroes. Heroes. We can't have our heroes on a starvation wage. What was a starvation wage? He defined a starvation wage as $15 or below $15 an hour. And then immediately he was okay with those heroes being on a starvation wage. And he moved along as if nothing was taking place and then called it a success, chest thumping along with the other Democrats all the way. Pot is still illegal in many states, meaning you could still be put into a cage in half of the country for using marijuana. Think of how weird that is. You're in one country or one state, perfectly fine. You cross the state border, and an alcoholic cop can grab you by your collar. I'm taking you to jail. You're breaking the law. You're breaking the law. Well, Joe Biden has basically allowed that. He has the power to change the scheduling. He didn't do it. He refused to act on the $1 trillion amount of student debt. And again, this is after Schumer has been begging him to do something on it. He has all the powers in the world to do something about it. He's basically skated and is passing some kind of basic radical incrementalist policy, some program that he's talking about doing. Even the Afghan pullout was bungled. And again, this is not the situation where we disagree with the fact that he pulled the troops out. Great, he should pull them out of Syria also. It's more so that it seemed like he didn't know what he was doing. I was reading this article on some of the Russian commanders talking about their pullout of Afghanistan and how they had a certain degree of, schadenfreude at the way that they did it versus the way Biden did it, because his was so much calamity. Immigration policy is just a hypocritical disaster, with Haitians being deported with using Title 42, something that Democrats shook their fist at Donald Trump about. Oh, he's so racist. And yet Biden is basically using the tools that Stephen Miller gave him in this case of denying asylum claims. And again, COVID is out of control with 2,000 people dying a day, even though that's the thing that he gets pretty much high marks on. Even his main key economic agenda is being stonewalled by two Democrats. And this kind of gets to this whole point of, dude, what are you accomplishing? Despite having the House and the Senate, you seem to be entirely incapable of coming up with a stick or carrot that's sufficient enough to get those two on the same page. And I knew this was going to be a problem going back to the $15 an hour minimum wage when Manchin was like, yeah, I don't care what the president wants. I'm not doing that. And basically willing to hold him by himself, hold up whatever agenda came forward if it didn't necessarily meet his corporatist aims. And in this very specific case, he didn't deal with Manchin then, so he has to deal with Manchin now. And Manchin now is basically saying, yeah, I don't care about your agenda. This is what I'm going to support, or this is what I'm not going to support. Biden told Manchin, you're effing up my agenda, man. Yes. And that in and of itself is not going to get him to change his mind on it. I'm making the point here that he's president of the United States. And there's certain powers that are put into that office. And that the public is looking at him. They recognize he has the House and the Senate. And they're questioning, what are you doing in that office? What are you doing? And while Democrats may be perfectly okay with the argument, well, at least he's not Trump, that is not going to fly for the rest of the country. Hence, independents dropping precipitously, and Republicans were never there with him in the first place. Shane, the polling is earned. My conjecture is the polling is earned. If you're going to be president, if you're going to have the House and the Senate, the public is going to have certain ideas about responsibility. And if you're going to run on a particular platform and you have powers to get some of that stuff done and you don't, well, of course they should hit you on it. Why wouldn't they hit you on it? I mean, even the COVID stuff, they had the opportunity to expand the number of clinics, to, get the federal government more involved in trying to create these kind of either hospitals or something where people can go to where they aren't necessarily filling up ERs and ICUs in the way that they're doing it. He's been this kind of behind the scenes, I don't want to call him the invisible man, but definitely not a forceful presence in that office when you would think a certain degree of forceful leadership will be needed. And so I would argue that the polling drop is earned. They're not picking on him. What are your thoughts?
It's 100% earned. Should have been down a bit sooner. But Afghanistan, I think, kind of kickstarted people looking at him a little bit more critically again.
Yeah.
For the first time, really, in his presidency, and I mean across the board. But maybe it's good. We got our guest on the line. But something that keeps coming to mind for me when we're talking about this stuff, maybe his absolute inability to get anything done is actually okay. Because I know from your perspective, you're like, you want our country to get better and stuff.
Yeah.
But if we step back and take a look, my traditional take on these things, or one of the things that keeps coming up, is it's like a bear with its paw stuck in a trap or something like that. And the more we strain to get out of that trap, the more we take, the more we exert ourselves at this point without doing the deeper work, which I think involves creating a new class of elites who can actually run this country effectively over the course of a couple of decades. That's another conversation. I'm saying something a little bit more radical there.
Yeah.
I'm saying there should be a new class of elites who should start forming, ideally have started before, but like anywhere in this period, if you create a new class of people who will ultimately insert themselves into key positions of power and run the country a decade or two down the line, theoretically, you could turn things around in a major way. That's all that I can see, that kind of change. That's the only kind of change I can see actually fixing things. If there are people who see what's going wrong, they work together out in public, and they come up with a constitutional means to dramatically reform our government over the course of, say, a couple of decades, that's the only way I see this thing actually, getting fixed in some useful and meaningful, long-lasting thing. And until that happens, I'm almost like, okay, keep the ship somewhat steady. Things have calmed down significantly since Trump. Maybe that's why people ultimately the polling might be crappy, but Biden is so much calmer than Trump. Under Trump, everything was about Trump, and it was like a world of chaos because there were all these scandals floating around and impeachment threat after impeachment threat and all this stuff. That was obviously done by the media. Biden's the complete opposite. I don't know, man. I want to go into our break, and this is Mark Frost, who'll be coming back with. We'll be talking economics and stuff, but he's philosophically minded enough. Whereas, we might want to carry some threads of this conversation over. But I think you see what I'm saying. I'm making a weird off-the-ball argument.
I guess my thing is the bear in a bear trap is basically going to bleed to death before it gets to any particular thing of changing anything. And while I agree that something definitely needs to change, I don't necessarily think standing pat without doing something is beneficial. I think the thing is going to bleed to death. It takes emergency treatment sometimes just to keep things just stable or not going off the cliff's edge. But I do agree on the endpoint on this notion of, something fundamental needs to change in the way that we go about our governance, either cultural or something, because this is not necessarily working, and it seems to get worse and worse with each administration.
Yeah. We'll go into our break. I could kind of unpack what I was saying there, but it's weird, and it's both formal and informal in a way that, I don't know, I'm finding a little bit confusing myself. Anyway, we'll be coming back in a minute with Mark Frost, talking about economics, simultaneously inflation, high unemployment, and like recruiters for businesses slowing down, actually bringing people in. So you have this weird, we'll be talking about it with Mark, but this weird set of two facts. One, unemployment is high. Two, businesses actually don't seem to want to hire people. We'll be talking about what's causing this, what it might lead to with Mark Frost when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Mark Frost. Mark Frost joining us now. How are you doing this morning, Mark?
Really good. How about you guys? Good show so far, and a really good one yesterday on Zelensky. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you for that. That was. I thought the first time guests were talking about Zelensky and the Pandora Papers. This recent release, of course, preceded by the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers. But yeah, he was great. Very interesting conversation and a very accessible conversation with him, Mr. LeBlanc, I believe it was.
Charming. You may not agree with every person you have on. I know there's people that don't agree with me, but at least you get a perspective that's not canned out of some mainstream media talking point.
Yes.
And it's something, and it's something that keeps the country and basically democracy alive. I mean, we have to have things like that, and people have to be informed, or they at least have to have their minds tested. I loved what Jamarl said just a little while ago while I was on hold. At some point, the excuse of, well, he's not Trump, has to stop. I mean, or it just becomes dumb. It's like having an abusive relationship, and your next relationship is, well, she wasn't Alice, I thought that was quite profound.
Thank you, Mark.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Trump very much. I turned on him on the 6th. But by the same token, people have to lead. I mean, that's why they're elected. That's why that's at the end of the day, they have to lead.
Well, it's weird. I mean, because Democrats, it's almost as if the moment that you're on a wavelength with somebody, you're willing to give them all sorts of benefit of the doubts. And so, like Obama, the perfect example. I used to work at this Democratic radio station. And I used to get in arguments with some of the owners of the station. The guy would be like, for example, whistleblowing. And I'd be like, what are you talking about, dude? Obama has been locking up whistleblowers left and right. No, but he did it legally. What are you talking about? He did it legally. Donald Trump didn't do, Donald Trump was locking up whistleblowers illegally. And it's like, so wait, you're trying to make the point that Obama was putting all of these people in prison for whistleblowing. Let's say trying to get Edward Snowden, the prosecution of Assange, not to mention multiple other whistleblowers in the country, basically detailing waste, fraud, and abuse. And because by your assessment, those people who were whistleblowing didn't do it in a very specific way, then they were eligible and perfectly fine with being put in prison. But when Donald Trump is doing something similar, threatening whistleblowers, that's off their reservation. He would say yes. In his head, those things are different, despite the fact that those things are exactly the same. It's the wavelength thing that gets very weird. And in their mind, well, he's not Trump. And so that's sufficient. So insufficient.
And after a while, it just wears thin to anyone that values logic. It's just like, okay, we understand you don't like Trump. Now, what are you going to do? It's just, it would be like you take a job and all you do is criticize the person that had your job before. Works for the first week, first month, maybe even, but eventually your boss is going to be like, okay, I understand you don't like the guy before, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear the comparison. I I need to formulate exactly what because the thought that I'm having here that I'm struggling to get out, it's like I don't know that it actually makes sense. It's so simple, which is I don't see our political system having the means right now to self-repair through an election, through any legitimate process. And I think that that's might be personal for me, but you go into an election, you're forced to choose for one of two candidates chosen by the two parties that are in play. Any attempt to start a third party or an independent party, anybody who's seen the scene in America knows it tends to not go well. You've had a couple attempts, but usually they just get